Morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock, and I think everyone's here. So, and we have a number of people online, including Mark. Who else do we have online?
Waters, legal counsel.
Oh, great. Welcome. It was a rather interesting sunrise this morning. You know, red sky morning, sailors take warning. So I'm traveling again, so I'm taking warning. Had a lot of rough flights traveling out west lately. So let's go ahead and get started and open the meeting. I don't have any COVID things to read, so I'm really happy. So you know, we have a full committee here. So I need a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
We have second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Your motion's approved, and we have no action items, so we'll go to our information item, and we'll turn that over. We'll start with Mark.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our next edition of the Water Resource Committee meeting. So we've got a few things, and it's kind of all put into one presentation, but broken into a couple parts. And you know, this is the time of year when we've typically been doing our water supply theme, and sort of through that there'll be some things that we kind of talk through related to that kind of reflect back on the retreat from last year, and I think as if you've looked through the slides a little bit, we're really getting into some of the ideas of resiliency and redundancy concepts that start from the state and regional level, as we have a shared resource, right down into our system, you know, and within our system. And so I think, you know, it'll be pretty interesting to kind of see that goes a little further than I think we've talked before. And also, you know, as we often do in this meeting, we take some of these topics and are able to use this as an opportunity to update on one of our core areas of our strategic plan. So we've got that embedded in here as well. And the final thing that I would like to say, you know, we'll take some credit for, but it's a little bit coincidental, but I think works out very well. Thinking back to the meeting, the Finance Committee meeting last week, which most of you were a part of, you know, when Jessica shared the update on the asset management program, at the beginning of that, she kind of had some information about the AWWA survey that had really the most important topics that are going on in our industry in many cases through some survey work. And in that, of course, was the asset management, which you got to hear. The second item in there happened to be the financial, sort of looking at capital and financing of capital projects over a long time, which we're right in the middle of and hearing. And the third item was around long-term water supply and many of the issues that we're facing with that. And so here we are, you know, hearing that. So we're kind of hitting all the big topics here in a pretty short time. So I think that feels like it works out pretty well and have some nice updates. So with that, Pam is going to take the lead here on the first part, and then Darren is going to bring it home on the second part, and Tom was really instrumental in helping pull all this information together so we can have some discussion and other staff members here after. So, but feel free to jump in with questions at any time.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. I don't think this crew will hesitate on questions.
Good. So we believe, I think all of us here, that water supply reliability and resilience are critical to giving our customers the service that we strive for. And so I'm going to kick it off, like Mark said, and talk about what's going on at the state level, the regional level, and how that some of our initiatives kind of play into what's going on there. So we're going to talk a little bit about Virginia after the strategic plan. There's a little intro on that. Talk a little bit about Virginia and some of the regulations that have been in the works. The state water plan that was pulled together for the second time. Then we'll skip to the Washington metro area. So this is all about the Potomac and what's going on with our neighbors. and then some of the priority initiatives that we are undertaking here at Loudon Water in the water resources area. The strategic plan, you recall, we all worked on it back in 2019, and 6 major goals, and one of those is on water resources. The strategic goal is effective water resources management, which is a plan and management of water resources to ensure sustainable service to our customers. And I would say the way that we've written this, sustainable includes that concept of reliable. So the 3 objectives we have here focused on protecting high quality raw water resources, managing them well in normal and emergency, and then engaging with key stakeholders kind of fit nicely into some of the initiatives that we have going on. I mentioned stakeholders, and just to reemphasize, we talk about this a lot, but in the regional world here, it is really important for us to participate in the activities that are conducted by some of these regional entities. And the ones that are represented here on the screen are some of the key ones. The regional ones that focus on the Potomac are really the Drinking Water Source Protection Partnership, the ICPRB with their scientific mission, and as facilitators of the regional co-op, Metro Washington Council of Governments is the one that maintains the regional drought plan. And then as we look at the reliability that's built into our system through our reservoirs, you know, Beaver Dam Reservoir and then Milestone Reservoir, obviously that's where our partners Nova Parks and Luckstone come in. DEQ is responsible for a lot, our permit, but as well all of these regulations at the state level, including state water plan. And then Fairfax Water is, you know, an intrinsic part of our redundancy, having that second feed into the Potomac.
Pam, real quick, are there any other private companies? I see this, you know, we have our key stakeholders here. All of them are public or authority, with the exception of Luckstone. Is that the only sort of major stakeholder that's a private company?
Good question. I'm thinking they are.
You know, I'll keep thinking while we're talking. I don't know that I can think of
How about
anything
the
significant.
at Travilla? Who's going to own that one?
Well, you'll hear a little bit of an update on that, but that is probably one of the $1 million questions right now. That is one of the topics that, from a regional perspective, is really trying to figure out, and that's a little bit unknown, I would say, right now.
And then we have people that the Corps of Engineers. We have the folks that manage the reservoir up on the north, the headwater, near the headwaters.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, you have the Washington Aqueduct, which is a part of our Army Corps of Engineers, and they supply water to DC. And you have WSSC as well, and both of those are, you know, possible in terms of the likely ownership or the operations of it. But I think a lot of unanswered questions right now.
And they're all members of the ICP.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, so it's pretty unique.
Yeah, I was just, you know, we have, yeah,
Right.
it is unique.
It is.
It is
Great question.
Some of the activities that we have, specific activities with the stakeholders that really merit mentioning are the co-op. So the co-op committees, there's an operations committee that the 3 major utilities, but then also the states, as well as federal government is a member of. There's this secondary storage work group. We're going to give you a little bit of an update on that. Loudon Water is not a member of co-op, but we are invited to participate in these meetings and that work group. The COG has both technical committees as well as policy committees. And I also mentioned they maintain the regional drought plan. They also facilitate the water security work group that all the utilities in the area are actively participants in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why are we not a member of the co-op? Is there a political reason or?
Well, we've talked a little bit about this in the past, but the original the original group was Fairfax Water, WSSC, and the Washington Aqueduct, and that goes back to the early 80s when that was formed. When we were working on our program, our intake, and working through the permit, there was some conversation about, first of all, through our permit condition, we participate with them, and the permit condition basically requires us to, and the region wanted that to happen. Makes sense. So that's where we are always invited into that. There's been some conversation and some informal sort of ways of saying, Loudon Water, maybe it makes sense for you to join, but there's never been a formal invitation. And what I would say from our perspective is that going back to how we move forward with our program, building our own storage, we've invested a lot into this, and we've sort of set ourselves up to be somewhat, I would say, self-sustaining in a way. And so we're in a little bit of a different situation. We have a lot at stake with the regional cooperative sort of assets through our relationship with Fairfax Water. We rely on that. We have a lot that we're very invested and very interested that continue to keep advance and get shored up over a long period of time. But we also have our own program, and so there's just never been an actual formal way of an invitation. But I think it's I think I don't know. I think that's yet to come. But I think there are many reasons where
you want to be independent from them.
Well,
And you can do what you want to do without having to consult them.
yeah, I would just say, for us, we've set ourselves up to be able to be. And now, if it were the right situation, that just hasn't presented itself to us yet. So I think we're in a pretty good place.
I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Mark, I was thinking about what Dale used to say. The co-op was formed of three basically equal partners, if you will, pretty big utilities. Yet they have no governance. They basically everything's, a lot of it's been a handshake along the way. And it was kind of concerning for a utility that's not the size that they are to are you an equal partner? Right? Are you an equal partner? So I think Dale used to talk about a lot of uncertainties there that
And-
made us be a little bit more cautious.
Yeah, and part of that governance, there's never been a new party added to the original agreement. We're the first ones that, have kind of been talked about more specifically. We've asked the question, well, even if we were to consider it, or if there was a way for some possibility there, wouldn't it make sense that there is a more formal process developed that really the invitation is for any other utility along the Potomac to consider joining? Now, not everybody's going to be in the situation of having put together and, invested in the program we have and have our own storage. So, maybe it's harder for another utility to do that, but it seems like there should be a process, and that just hasn't been developed yet.
So let's talk a little bit about the Potomac River Basin Commission. You all know that Mark is an alternate commissioner for Virginia. I mentioned the Drinking Water Source Protection Partnership. We have a lot of involvement with the technical committees there. And then through Virginia, lately there's been a number of regulatory advisory panels. And these are panels that they convene to comment on and it's a public process to work through proposed regulation. And so DEQ has held several of these the last 2 years that have focused on water supply. Loudon Water's participated in 2 of those. Recently, the Virginia Municipal Drinking Water Association was formed just to focus on these aspects of drinking water issues with the state and really to focus on regulation and legislative issues. So let's talk a little bit about Virginia and DEQ and the state water plan. So there was no state water plan previous to 2015. That was the first statewide water resources plan, and it came of all the information that had been gathered after the state put together a regional water supply planning program. This is the second version, the 2020 report, and it looks ahead to the year 2040. And to come up with all of the conclusions that are in this plan, DEQ has performed modeling on all the basins and subbasins within the state. And they've looked at surface water and groundwater. And, basically the two things they're really looking at is growth and development in these communities, as well as what might, so that's kind of the usage of the resource. And then climate change is the other aspect that they've been looking at in terms of the potential impacts to the supply. And so this is all about supply and demand, and do we have adequate supply and demand to satisfy the needs of the state? And they have performed what they call a cumulative impact analysis, and that has to do with the needs of the stream, the aquatic and ecological needs of the streams, beyond just the human needs, our water supply needs. Some of the highlights of this were the scenarios looked at the potential for future climate impacts, and findings were that they found that in the headwaters areas of some parts of the state and areas with large demand or increasing growth, who did not have reservoir storage, there are anticipated to be problems. So basically, the Potomac Basin fits into the watershed. It's not a headwaters watershed. We have quite a sizable drainage area. We do have a growing demand anticipated, but we have a considerable amount of storage. The other finding of the study was that the regional areas, that areas of the state that were planning regionally were far better situated for the future than those that aren't, which sounds obvious, but that's because we're sitting in one of the areas of the state that is very regionally focused and working cooperatively on this. The local and regional water supply regulation was developed after that significant drought of 2001, 2002. And it required the preparation of regional water supply plans. Loudoun Water was part of the Northern Virginia Regional Water Supply Plan, which included all of the counties and the towns that are up here. I can't remember how many. I'm going to say 12, but quite a number. Kind of put all of the information together. The Northern Virginia Regional Commission filed it for us. And then it was to be updated we're supposed to look at it every 5 years and officially update it every 10 years. Well, the legislature decided that DEQ needed to re-examine the regulation and integrate the idea of regional planning areas based on river basins. That isn't the way it originally had been proposed. And so they went through a process, 6 meetings to go through the regulation to, obtain stakeholder input, which was not just water utilities. It was, again, some of the ecologically based organizations, I'll say like the James River, maybe the River Keepers. I can't remember some of the others, but they tried to get a wide balance of folks involved in this regulatory review. So the regulation has been revised, and I can't recall the process of it actually being published. So we don't actually have a date to do that next regional water supply plan. It was supposed to be conducted this year, but it's going to be deferred basically because the regulation's been revised. I think really the significance is it has to do with the river basins. They've grouped some of the entities, and some of them aren't necessarily friendly with each other. And they even share, like the James River is probably one of the most contentious areas of the state because there's a lot of folks down there that they have to share the river. but they don't necessarily get along. So again, this one isn't about us. And that is, I think, the legislator who proposed this river basin language is from the James River Basin. But we will be putting our information together to supply into that, the regional water supply plan, whenever it's due next.
Pam, question, since our river basin also includes Maryland, how does that factor into this state language, given that this is Virginia?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'll tell you what's fascinating is that in the water supply plan or the state water plan, the 2020 version, it actually showed the entire Potomac River Basin. I was like, oh, wow, you finally recognize that the Potomac isn't just in Virginia. I'm not exactly sure how it's going to be incorporated, but it was interesting to me that DEQ actually documented that, that the Potomac goes beyond the bounds of Virginia, and they put it in the state document. So,
It's really interesting because there's the Potomac River, and Pam kind of said, it probably in some ways could use a little bit more structure from a governance standpoint. But at the same time, there's a history of a very cooperative sort of way of working by a number of different jurisdictions from state level, really it goes from West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And there's just this history that it's been very cooperative in many ways. And both the ICPRB and MWCOG have been very instrumental in these leadership groups that have kind of helped, I would say, keep it pulled together in many ways. Not that they're doing it on their own. The utilities have been very well, the states. And in some ways, DEQ probably sees the benefit. They're involved through ICP, they're a member of the commission. And then in other areas, we'll see that in the drought planning. There can be some areas where there can be a little bit of a tension. But again, there's just a history of a very cooperative way of working that's been successful.
and I think actually, Mark kind of triggered it for me. The best answer to your question is that the Northern Virginia Regional Plan actually relied upon the co-op's reliability study that they put together every 5 years, the demand forecast and reliability study, which is coming up in the slides here. So the work that we're talking about that the ICPRB has been involved in putting together these major demands for the Potomac River are likely those that would be relied upon and incorporated into the regional plan.
The risks that you're describing with the James River are not risks that you feel we face with the Potomac River Basin.
Thankfully, no. Yeah.
Even with the complications between where the border is on the river and all
Right.
of that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
Even
kind of
with
surprising
complications.
because
Yeah.
for the Roanoke River, they end up having to go to court over
Yeah.
Yeah.
and allocate it based on because of the North Carolina trying to say that people can't take water out of the reservoirs. So
Yeah.
now what?
Right.
And 60%, 68% comes from Virginia. So
Yeah.
Crazy.
So it's a good segue for us. So the co-op, we've talked about it a lot. It's the section for cooperative operations for water supply on the Potomac, the official name. There's a number of activities that the co-op undertakes on behalf of the regional group that gets water out of the Potomac River. Drought monitoring, drought exercises, monthly water supply outlooks, very, very focused on drought as that critical factor that defines our resilience of the Potomac River, and long-term planning. And the long-term, not yet. Well, let's talk.
One more real
Yep.
quick question. This map that you've got up there,
Uh-huh.
these
Let me go back.
delineations are what?
I think there's
Some type of
sub-basins.
Like sub watershed basins.
I'm looking for Loudon on here. And
Yeah.
What watershed is that,
Potomac Basin
outlining.
Precipitation,
or sub-watershed?
Um, gosh,
It doesn't look like a familiar shape to me.
no,
Well,
it doesn't.
You can see the shape of the road around Leesburg in that little half circle.
Sure, but it's going all the way up to what looks
Oh,
like
Germantown.
Winchester and,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and all of that.
Funny,
is-
I don't know, I don't remember ever seeing the names of the little.
It's an odd
sub-basins.
shape, I
I
haven't-
can't remember.
Looks like we're in two different basins.
I don't know what it is.
Well, I mean, the whole county, yeah.
I mean, all this is the Potomac.
It all flows to the Potomac.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely sub-basins.
Yeah.
I don't have names from them.
Yeah, parts,
Yeah.
And you can see that it reaches across, right?
you can
So
actually
you're
see the
saying-
reservoir.
Yeah.
The Beaver Dam
You know,
Reservoir.
Yeah, I was gonna observe, it looks like you're seeing where branches break off, so that smaller one towards the center looks to be the lower Shenandoah. And then it appears you're seeing a junction
Yeah.
at Harper's Ferry where the Shenandoah and lower Potomac come together.
Right.
So it does appear to be sub-watersheds of the basin.
Sure, but we don't know what were included in there because it
Well,
looks like it's
it-
Winchester and it's quite a large area.
I'm sure there's a map that has
It is
more
quite
detail
large.
on it than this one.
Yeah, not a big deal.
I think we're actually farther down than I was thinking. Let me see if I can use this little button here. I think we are actually down in here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Well, that's
Right.
where Leesburg is. You can see.
Can you see
the little
Leesburg?
Reservoir.
I can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just an unfamiliar
I'm having
shape.
some
I've
vision
seen- I've
problems.
seen so many of those
Yeah, right,
sub watersheds and whatever.
Yeah,
I've
yeah,
just never
yeah.
seen one this shape before.
Yeah.
Not a huge deal, but.
It's more than
We
that,
picked a
isn't it?
precipitation map. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right.
Looks like a pyramid.
This secondary water supply initiative is, this started a number of years ago. So there was preliminary planning going on and so they've started using the terminology secondary water supply initiative, but this is all investigation of the Travilla Quarry, right? So the preliminary planning was conducted by the co-op and ICPRB back in 2015. And then COG picked it up and did an update to a regional redundancy study in 2016, which determined that, gosh, that's probably the best thing that could protect the region in terms of potential contamination of the river, as well as drought. And so I would say that there's been a lot of discussions between 2016 and 2022, but it really hadn't advanced very far. And I think there got to be a little bit of momentum behind it. And so the last year or so, both ICPRB and the COG started helping with engagement with some of the federal legislators. And so that's what's been really going on recently is federal engagement with the federal legislators and trying to get it slipped into WRDA. And so everyone kind of has their fingers crossed right now that this might actually, and so what would get slipped in is funding for a study. So it's $3 million for a study that would be conducted under the auspices of the Corps of Engineers. And so, to see what others are thinking about what they've heard, we added this little note about, I think that's WTOP. It's been kind of staying on top of this over the years. But it's looking very positive.
Has the hangup been a lack of $3 million for a study? It seems like that money is not that big of a deal for the whole regional. group
No,
involved
no,
here.
not that
Yeah.
by itself. I would say that there's a strong feeling that this is, from a regional perspective, of course, there's a lot of interest. They'd like to have it. We're probably talking somewhere in the $750 million to $1 billion or $1 billion overtime investment, and so I think it's a little bit of, how sort of aggressive to be on it, trying to figure out both who would own it, how would it kind of run, who would operate it, but also how is it going to be paid for? And what has got the momentum going in the last 2 years is a huge effort on trying to establish federal funding. And so that's where the focus is right now.
And so it's not just the first part,
Yeah.
is really what Mark's saying. It's not the 3 million.
Yeah.
It's the bigger
It's the
number.
bigger number.
People are, so, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's just another broad run upgrade.
Exactly.
It's just too big. You're doing one, just do a second.
Right now, so annually, the ICPRB orchestrates a regional drought exercise. And this is all about helping us to maintain drought preparedness by being able to communicate with each other about, what our withdrawals are, so it's each utility, it's fairly simple, frankly, the way that it's been set up. So each utility will report what we've been using on a daily basis. And then ICPRB checks the river flows, on more than a daily basis. But it's all about, the exercise is just all about that communications piece. It's the protocol that we use to communicate with each other and watch the river very carefully. So it's conducted over about 3 days, and it's scheduled for mid-November, so it'll be coming up. Jessica Edwards and her team and water operations are the front line on this. And so they get involved in reporting our withdrawals, and they stay on top of the exercise.
So we do that once every year?
Yes.
How many years have we been doing this? Is this a
Wow.
long time thing, or is this somewhat new?
I recall since I've been here, 10, 12 years, I think it's been happening that long. Every year.
I think
Maybe starting somewhere.
starting when did we do it before Trap Rock was online? I don't think we would have had a withdrawal. I
Yeah,
would,
like whether you mean we participated
whether
or not, but I
we
think the region has
participated.
been
The
doing it.
region's been doing it for a very long time.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been doing it as long as Trap Rock's been on.
Hey Pam, this is Kathy. We have done a total of 4 reports so far.
Right.
So
Yep,
pretty-
that makes
pretty new
sense.
exercise for us then.
2018, so when Trap went online. Thanks, Kathy. We mentioned the co-op and the reliability study that's performed every 5 years. So it's a demand and resource availability forecast. The last one was issued in 2020. It takes at least a year for them to pull this together. They pull it together every 5 years, starting back in 1990. And the key is, can the system resources meet the aggregate demand forecast for the whole region? The next forecast report is scheduled for 2025, so probably 2024, end of this next year, they'll get started on that. The last version, the change was really looking at a range of demands, looking at this low, medium, high demand, as well as looking at 3 different climate scenarios, trying to kind of get that wide range of where we might fall and what the region might need.
When we do the drought exercise, is there like one main point of contact that the different utilities all go to, or is it all the whole group all at once interacting together?
It's not a whole group all at once. It's individually, you send, your point of contact is at ICPRB.
Okay,
So there's a person there, and there's sort of a template.
so everything channels through
Channel.
IPRB.
Yep,
That's.
So
the
that
main-
everybody's not having to
That's right.
that's right.
directly communicate.
That's right.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Makes sense.
And then, if it was a real issue situation, like sometimes we have with spills or things that are coming from downstream, then you'll find a lot more informal talking between the utilities.
Okay.
We talk to Leesburg and Fairfax Water quite a lot
Hmm.
in those types of situations, but not for the drought exercise.
I have one question. I apologize if I missed it, but it seems like all of this is cooperative. There's no legislation that requires the utilities to do certain things.
That is
what I read?
absolutely true.
What's that?
That's true.
That's not all bad.
That's not all bad.
No, I'm just.
And again, we're talking multiple states and federal government is involved, the District of Columbia, and that that's why it's a little bit, it's been a challenge to say, well, what's the authority for more of a regulatory approach versus the cooperative, because you have multiple jurisdictions involved.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just
Right.
want,
It's unique. It's a bit unique.
it seems like it's all cooperative.
Yes.
Though it seems too that there's a self-preservation element to it where it's like, I mean, it's, you want to be part of this.
No, no, I'm
Well,
not.
Yeah, you want to be part of it, you want to be cooperative, but, you know, you want to do what's right for you. And,
Sure.
and I think our plans with,
Well,
with our, you know, quarry strategy is way ahead of many of the other utilities in the area.
Well, I would say that's been, you know, the real strategy and the vision of, and we talked about it at the retreat, going back to ultimately the decision by the Loudon Water Board back in 2007 to do the Potomac Water Supply Program, is there was kind of an approach there where we're very engaged through our relationship with Fairfax Water, but there's a element of controlling our own destiny and self-sufficiency that sets up a really good balance of that. And we feel like it's been very successful.
All right, we're going to transition a little bit to some of our initiatives that fit into these. Three priorities coming out of our strategic plan, three priority actions. One was to develop a modeling tool where we could simulate water supply scenarios and see how those differences in demands and supplies might affect us. To plan for emergencies by preparing response protocols for water supply emergencies, and to do our own demand forecasting to evaluate our daily, seasonal, and peak operational water supply needs, and then relate that back to the availability of water supply. Same thing that basically the state does, same thing that ICPRB does, but this is us, Loudon Water, taking more of a deep dive on our system. The first of these, the modeling tool, is it's called OASIS. It stands, I've got the acronym spelled out there for you, Operational Analysis Simulation of Integrated Systems. What it is a simulation model. And the ICPRB developed this initially in 2004, updated it in 2012, and then most recently between last year and this year, we're bringing the Loudon Water system into the model. So it's been updated. Loudon Water decided that we wanted to utilize this model for our own purposes. So in the graphic I've got there, I don't believe you'll see any of our Loudon Water assets. It's an older schematic, but
Yeah.
that has currently been added to the system, and we're in the process of getting to know it, working with it. We're in that learning stage with this model right now.
Does this harvest an existing software or is this proprietary to ICPRB?
It is proprietary. It was developed by a firm called Hydrologics, and it was the founder of the firm Hydrologics. Actually, I don't know if he worked under contract for the ICPRB, but developed the PRISM model, which is the one that really is their core model. Potomac Reservoir River Simulation Model is what that stands for, PRISM. This OASIS model is supposed to emulate that one, but it's on a easier, more simple platform to manipulate is the idea. So it is proprietary, but we have it, and it's actually Hydrologics was absorbed, merged with Hazen and Sawyer within the last few years. So we are working with Hazen and Sawyer and their modeling team to get all of this integrated.
So this software is then available to anybody who's a member of ICPRB?
That is, yes, that I'm not sure that it's written that way, but effectively, yes. Okay. I think that probably when we submitted this back in 2020, we talked to the the board about the risk and resilience assessment that was required by EPA under the America's Water Infrastructure Act of 2018. It does relate to some of these water supply elements. It does also relate to a lot of what we're going to be talking about in part 2 of this presentation. But we did, identify operational strategies. The Goose Creek Emergency Pipeline is actually one of those key strategies. And we updated the emergency response plan for the utility. And the model that we were just talking about is going to be useful in developing and kind of updating these water response plans. We feel that there's a big value to being able to simulate, hypothetical occurrences. The other major item coming out of this was that this was only required for our central water supply system, but we intend to perform these analyses, this risk and resilience assessment using this protocol for the wastewater system as well as the community systems. Not required. Just,
Be involved with community wastewater systems and taking the move.
Remind me, is the Goose Creek, is that pipeline completed?
It is.
Okay.
It is.
I don't go to the CIPs. But
Yes.
You're welcome.
I know. I'm not like you. You're all the meetings. I can only do so many meetings.
Is anyone
Now that
doing
they're online.
this resiliency for like Hamilton and some of the other smaller communities that aren't really a part of the county, but not necessarily part of our purview? I mean, we're looking at assessments for the community systems.
Good question.
So like Waterford.
I'm confident Hamilton is doing nothing.
I'm feeling like they fall below the threshold that it was required, to be honest. I'm not positive though, but I'm feeling that they,
But they're the ones that we manage, like Waterford.
Yeah, and one of the things, that we're getting to today is in sort of this part 1, part 2, and you probably picked up on this, I'm sure already, but at the state and regional level, all of these efforts are about continuing to enhance resiliency and redundancy in water supply. Part 2 will really start to illustrate how even within our system, we're doing many of the same, we're keeping the same mindset, and we do that within our system. That's probably the quest. So all of the small systems, you can say they're getting the benefit of those larger initiatives from the state and regional level to some degree. It's probably what a lot of them are relying on, but we're also doing it within our system. And I think you'll see a few really good illustrations of how we're doing that.
I mentioned both at the state level as well as ICPRB that they were incorporating climate uncertainties into the forecasts. And so we feel like looking at how climate change might impact Loudoun Water's suite of services, not just drinking water, also reclaimed water, wastewater, is a wise idea. So we have undertaken kind of an overview study, and the effects of, or the results that we've gotten out of the first stage, which is really just looking at the modeling, right? Just getting the numeric piece of it out there, is that we should anticipate in the, and we did it in, there's actually 3 different time periods, the longest going out at least 100 years. So, but the numbers that I've noted here are dealing with the nearest ones that just extend to 2050. But the expectation and the temperature models are pretty good. Everybody's seeing a lot of alignment with these global climate models and the temperature aspects. So we're feeling pretty solid with the temperature results. Precipitation is kind of a different beast, because precipitation just takes a whole lot of other factors together with the temperature. It kind of bundles it up. It has to do with where the mountains are and, all these other factors. So it is less easy to make numeric predictions than it is to observe trends. And talking about temperature, we could see that the prediction is that the average temperatures would raise by 3 to 5 degrees, depending upon the month. And the extreme heat, so like we have a record of 105 degrees, the expectation is that would go to 109. And you realize that if you're going to get that hot, that what you're going to pick up is all these other extreme heat days, are going to be added as well. So there's definitely expected to be temperature increases, and the precipitation trends that would accompany it most likely would increase our annual rainfall, but they would likely decrease seasonal rainfall, that's the drought issue, right? If we get a decrease during the dry period, that's when we would get extreme drought. But we're also going to probably get whether it's a benefit or a curse, extreme rainfall. Usually it's not a good thing, to be honest. It's usually incredibly poor water quality. It causes flooding, causes all kinds of other things, but we would expect to see an increase in extreme rainfall.
Is the exercise here meant to be predictive, or is this meant to be really just more of a sensitivity analysis?
Yes.
Because sensitivity is easy. You add 10%, you reduce 10%. You go, what this, what if that? You're just running scenarios.
Yeah.
Predictive, I go, I don't know. We don't know what the weather's gonna be next week, let alone
I think
years
we-
from now.
Absolutely.
it's
We
not
think
predictive.
that the same. And so for us, the mindset we have about impacts of climate change is how do we deal with the extremes? And it's having flexibility and options and ways and that's what we're focused on.
Yeah.
We're not trying to focus on trying to be a predictor of it.
Yeah, we're just running sensitivities.
Yep.
But I think what we did want to see from the analytical piece, this piece, was what are the bounds of what
Yeah.
we're looking at, right? And so they ran, I don't know how many, I'm going to say it was over 50 global climate models. It's kind of it's the protocol, the scientific protocol right now. And so you kind of get all these different lines, right? And then they sort of coalesce and you come up with a central tendency. And that's central tendency for the temperature effects. It does coalesce onto numbers. For the precipitation effects, it's not quite as clean. But your point is well taken. I think the way we can utilize this information is probably more, it is sensitivity based.
And the effects of precipitation are self-evident. What's the
Mhm.
effect, the temperature? Next summer, it's 5 degrees hotter. Like what, is that evaporation or what's the actual effect on our water supply?
I'll give you, okay, so evaporation would be one,
Yeah.
right? And that's, and a large scale evaporation, right?
Sure.
Extremely dry because of the lack of
So
rainfall.
if it's hotter, we
and the
would
heat,
assume less
right.
water in the Potomac.
Then you'd probably have higher demands. Definitely our industrial customers, our data center customers would be, and I know I'm skipping to reclaimed water, but
Yeah, but it's still.
but do
water.
we have enough reclaimed water? If we don't, we've got potable water backups for all of them.
So if it's hotter, they have to work, it's more to
It's-
cool the systems?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
that's right. And we've got data centers on, right?
Mhm.
So there's that demand. Exactly. Outdoor water use and irrigation goes up. So there's your demands increase. So those are some of the keys. The other things that we have to think about get more toward the infrastructure side. Our pumping systems, will they cool the way they're supposed to? We've got a bunch. I want to say a gazillion, pumping systems. Do we have to be concerned about any particular pumping systems having issues with extreme heat? So,
But then I think there's not just the volume, but then there are water quality issues that can come about with changes in
It's a good point. too.
temperature.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and
That's true.
additional rain, you get.
Algal
you get
blooms
higher
and like,
humidity
yeah.
levels. and-
Yep.
yep, algal blooms is a key problem potential. So, yep, and that's the next stage. So we did the quantitative piece, just to see what the numbers look like, because we wanted to know.
Right.
How low could
Do you
the,
use this? Oh, go ahead.
how low could the Potomac go before, I know we have our intake. That was
On the
not super deep, so has there ever been an event where the Potomac has gotten so low that our intakes would be exposed?
I think probably a lot of that, no. And I would say there is, before the 1982 is when the Water Supply Coordination Agreement came into effect, the use of the reservoirs, when they're released to keep a level where it's at. There's also a kind of parallel complementary agreement that the region is involved in called the low flow allocation agreement. And it requires a certain level, it's what, 100 million gallons a day
Yeah.
flow to be maintained from an environmental standpoint. And so if it ever reached that stage, that agreement would get kicked in, and all of the surrounding states and jurisdictions are a part of that. And it would put absolute restrictions on what each jurisdiction can use at that point. That has never gone into effect, that agreement. And again, that was in 1978. It was then successively the Water Supply Coordination Agreement that was specifically kind of brought in with the use of the reservoirs to hopefully never get to that point. So, but they're both kind of there in tandem, but it hasn't reached that level, thankfully, to the cooperation and the use of the reservoirs. And again, at that point, we would be relying on our additional systems in our own reservoir.
Right. Under the terms of our permit, if it were that low, we would be off the river. We would be off the river.
Off the road.
Yep.
Mhm.
Have we ever got close, like in '02?
I think it was in 1999 and 2007, 1999 was maybe,
99,
um,
2001.
but of course we weren't, that was before any of them were before we had ours, but they haven't been.
Yep.
But we get our water from two different sources on the Potomac. One's the Fairfax intake and the other is ours. So
Mr. Allen, if I may, in terms of where our intake is situated, our intake in the Potomac, that is, as we approach the threshold at which we are required to come off the river and utilize our quarry storage, the intake does become visible. There are inches to maybe a foot of water above the top of the half barrel. So you can see it, getting to that point at which it would be exposed. And but that is the entire premise of our permit and the, sort of net zero impact to the Potomac Basin as it reaches that vulnerable state. That's what I've observed in low flow events that we've had, in the couple of years that we've been running the plant.
And as far as Fairfax Water's supply goes, they installed what do they call it? They have two intakes, right? They have one on the side, on the channel, and then they installed one at the bottom of the reservoir,
Out in the
of the
middle.
river.
Yeah.
In the middle, right? So, that one's, I don't want to say impervious to drought, but basically,
Flow goes down and then everyone has to cut back. We have to get kicked off the river, and now we're getting less water from Fairfax because they've got to cut back. It's like a cascading.
Yeah.
Back down.
And there are multiple tools in there. This kind of goes into our water demand management. This is our approach with our customers on an every year annual basis during the warmer weather times where we do a lot of work with messaging, encouraging, how to do, wise water use, schedules for irrigation that makes sense. If we start approaching those really low levels, there's also a Loudoun County ordinance that can get kicked in, and it's mandatory restrictions on the use of
Yep.
water, especially for outdoor usage. So there's a number of additional layers and tools that come into play as well.
and that is coordinated across the region. That
Correct.
is the point of COG's regional drought plan.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is to remember that the whole purpose of those upstream reservoirs is in the event of something as extreme as what we're talking about. Never had to release from those.
Right.
Right?
right.
But they're there. They've been there. That is their sole purpose. And we've invested in those. Loudoun Water has through our purchase from Fairfax Water. So the 50 MGD purchase from Fairfax Water includes the storage, even though we would also come off of the river and be reliant upon our reservoir. We've still got their supply, even if it were at a reduced level.
So on the previous slide, I
Yeah.
think you can hear me.
I'll go back.
In the previous slide, when we talk about risk and resilience, the thing that comes to mind is an ash flow, oil slick on the river.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we've talked about that many times, but I think could happen more often. than
More
a
likely.
drought.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
what
Well, and
concerns
that,
me.
and of course, anything that's isolated to the Potomac is just really enhances and heightens the value of our quarry storage. And in the meantime, this was the driver for our Goose Creek
Yep.
Emergency supply. So we have also now the ability to pull from Goose Creek with Beaver Dam as a backup straight to Trap Rock. So that kind of gets us to the quarry storage.
So this is the transition point to kind of talk about what we've been doing for reliability and resilience at the utility scale. Want that?
He wants the pointer.
Trade with you. There you go.
Okay. Yeah, Pam talked a lot about kind of the really big picture, states, regional, but all that really ties back down into what we do every day in planning and design and in our operations. So I kind of met some of you. I'm Darren Geldert. I work in our planning department, but I work closely with our designers, with our land development team, with operations, and of course with water resources all the time. And I'm going to touch on a few topics here. These are, you consider examples, selected pieces of how resilience planning, reliability planning kind of seeps into everything we do. And I really think there's examples that we could keep going on all day, especially if we got into IT or other departments. But we'll talk about a few of these here and kind of our approach toward planning for system resilience, and then how some of our actual designs also reflect that. So when you think about resilience in terms of planning, I mean, Pam talked a little bit about this. We're actively involved in helping with projections, looking at our demands and our flows, what we expect to be coming, in the next couple of years and 30 years out. We look a lot at criticality of our system. Do we have the right infrastructure in the right places? Are we well connected? And then we use some other models. So the OASIS model Pam mentioned is new. We've had a longstanding hydraulic model of our distribution system too. So on the couple of examples of what we do with planning and when we're looking at our system, one of the things we really try, especially on the water system, is to make sure that we have plenty of connectivity or looping so that if there is an outage, if there is for maintenance, for emergency, a line break, whatever it is, we have alternate ways to convey the water so that any outage is then minimized. Those looping and connectivity is essential to our land development team. They're looking for that all the time. They're getting easements related to that, so future connections can be looped in. Another thing we do with that is our storage is generally elevated storage, meaning it's up in the air. So by doing that, that allows us, even during a power outage, we have water that can continue to pressurize our system. So there's multiple examples as we work through that. And a lot of that is set up in kind of some of our master planning documents that we use to help guide development in the system.
Elevated storage is really not.
Oops, I'm going the wrong way here. Yeah, it's elevated storage. There's multiple purposes. So yes, it's elevated so that it can be operated under pressure without having to repump it. It also provides a really good operational buffer for us so that our pumps don't have to be sized to meet the very, very peak flows, and we can use that storage volume to help meet those peak flows. So it's a buffer there. The storage really has kind of three components, you could say. It's that operational buffer, which helps us in our pumping efficiencies. There's also a just emergency storage reserve for those events. And then there's also often a fire flow capacity that we reserve just for the event of a fire, a different type of emergency.
If I recall, with our most recent contributions to elevated storage. That was the 600 zone. Is that what it was?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, the 600 zone tank, put a new 1 million-gallon tank out there. And that's essentially the general approach to storage, and it varies, would be to have about half of a day of storage elevated or available. We've got a bit more than that in our system right now, and that's about what 1 million gallons is out in the 600 zone right now.
And for those that were here during that time, or, you know, you might recall, we kind of took some heat over that. We fully recognized and understood that was on the western edge of our system. It was a visual impact. But for us, we fought pretty hard to maintain, you know, because we were getting pushed to sort of, you know, do something that would take away the visual impact and do pump storage, ground level or underground. And, you know, it was very interesting to have to kind of publicly sort of try to help understand these issues that Aaron talking about the value. And, you know, gravity has been used for all of history. And, you know, there's really no way to improve the use of gravity. It's a way of simulating it, but it takes a lot of energy. It reduces the reliability. And so we were willing to really work through that one the best we could. And fortunately, we were able to do that.
Well, people forget, and the public forgets, that just down the street from there were two schools that required 2,500 and 3,000 gallons per minute.
Yeah.
And the only way to do that is
And more coming.
stick it up in the air.
Yeah.
You know.
So, yeah, Pam talked a lot about the kind of projections, and the region does that. We also closely watch what's going on at the county, and pull from their population and employment projections, and also their projections for like industrial use, data centers, square footage coming up. And we tie that with our own local knowledge of development, and then do planning projections. We analyze what our demands are now, and we're looking out in the near term, and then also out to about 30 years out, to make sure that we have that demand. Those demands we also then tie to our wastewater side, flow projections. We tie those with our reclaim system. So there's multiple projections going on, and we kind of base that as best we can on what the county's doing. And sometimes we will add a sensitivity analysis on top of that to kind of say, well, what if it was 10% more? How does that impact us? Or what if we put 10% more in certain areas of our system?
And Darren, I imagine that this also ties into our ERC calculations in sort of the short term.
Yes. So a lot of those projections, they kind of overlap, and the ERCs get a little trickier because they become more of a financial tool, almost than just a demand or growth, because of the difference between water and wastewater. But yes, they're all linked together. And then the other thing we do with all those projections of demand and growth, we will put them into our hydraulic model. Pam talked about kind of this supply side model that we're just getting into. Well, we also have, and we've had for probably 20 years or more, a distribution model, which is currently an all pipes model. It includes every pipe, every valve, every hydrant, maybe with the exception of something that's built in about the last 6 months or something. And we can then also input with coordination from operations controls that we use on our pumps, and we can simulate our system. So we put in different levels of demand, and we will simulate what happens, you know, in the winter or in the summer, or sometimes we're looking more at water quality effects. There's lots of different ways we can run that model.
Question. How extensive is the model? In other words, do you have every pipe in the system in the model?
Yeah.
Not just regions?
No, it's a complete, every pipe is in the model. The only pipes that wouldn't be in there are probably pipes that have been built in the past 6 months or so, or something like that. We update it regularly to try and keep that, you know, as calibrated as possible. Yeah, that said, the models with the now with the current computing capabilities and so on, it makes it a lot easier to run. It used to be you would run it and it would take a long, long time and it would fail and so on. But now you can run, either a steady state model or an extended period, extended over days or weeks, and see how the tanks fluctuate and so on. It's quite quick now.
Darren, the other thing about the model is you put all the future pipes in the model as well. So it's the basis of it is all the pipes in the existing system, but we look to the future as well to size the pipes, where to best locate those pipes. And that's where he was talking about all those future water demands can be loaded into the model sort of, geospatially. We put them in the right areas where we expect the growth to occur to help size the system, make sure that it'll perform appropriately in the future as well. So that's where a lot of that sensitivity analysis really comes in.
That's a great point. So I guess we were doing that with like the JLMA stuff.
Exactly.
Then.
Yes.
That's
so
exactly
helpful.
right.
It's so
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah.
So we were able to relatively quickly and easily put in different alignments or different connections to see, could we then supply fire flow, get adequate pressure, even under high demands, or because especially JLMA, we were very uncertain as to what's coming. There's still some uncertainty there. So we kind of, okay, let's just try a little bit more and see what happens. Or what if also Leesburg says, hey, we'd really like to tie in here and take 4 million gallons a day or something, and just kind of see what happens.
So they're looking at, all the whole range, whether it's filled with data centers and water cooled or air cooled and, other types of developments. They're looking at that full range.
It's awesome. It's so helpful.
Fire flow is important.
Fire flows are one of the critical things. So I actually kind of have a list of some of the ways that we take advantage of that model, and currently a lot of people like to call it a digital twin. But basically it's a digital representation of that physical system that's out there. And I would say every week our land development team is reviewing models that we get in relation to new developments to look very on a neighborhood basis or on a small scale basis, like, do they have the appropriate fire flow? Especially if they've got a school in their neighborhood or some other, high commercial facility. The water quality team will occasionally use this to review water age, which is a good surrogate for water quality. Operations uses this a lot when we look at outage planning. If we need to take a tank offline, or if we need to shut down a main for some period of time, how might that impact our system, our fire flow, our pressure? We've done it with emergency response planning. When they did the drought exercise 2 years ago, I think, we did a bunch of modeling related to that to say, well, what if Fairfax could only give us half as much water? What would we do? Do we have to operationally change how we move water around?
Water age, that's just the length of time the water's sitting in the elevated tank. That's
Yes. So basically, when it comes out of the plant, we say it has kind of zero age. And then as it moves through the system, it gets into the tank. It may sit in the tank for a day or two, and then it takes time to move through. There's actually a lot of water stored in our pipes underground. So there's elevated storage. In a sense, there's a bunch of storage underground, and it can take some time, a week, to get out to the edges of our system.
And I have no sense of this. What,
Mhm.
if the water was in, we have 1,500 miles of pipes?
Yeah.
If it's in the pipes for 2 weeks, is that a problem, or do we go, no big deal? If it's in a month, I mean, I have no sense for where we might have a problem.
I think it varies, but I mean, a couple of weeks is quite common on the edges of the system. Generally, though, most of our system is probably in that 4 days or less range.
Okay.
Because we have a good chlorination system or chloramine system, our lab and our teams are monitoring that all the time. And we actually look most closely in some of those places where we know the water gets older or has potentially less quality. And we have rechlorination or these chlorination stations at some of our tanks to help boost it in the summer when we need it. But because we have not actually completed a water quality model, it gets quite complicated with the chemistry. You have to assume temperatures. But the water age is a good surrogate for general water quality.
And if you recall our meeting earlier this year, we've also got an annual hydrant flushing, and that really is a refresher for the whole system, kind of once a year as well.
Yep. I'll just touch on one more. Just you mentioned fire flow capacity and how critical that is. Actually, in 2019, 2020, the county went through the process with the ISO, which was the Insurance Services Organization, I think, and they basically rate counties for fire flow. And then they kind of sell that to insurance companies and they help set their rates. So we worked closely. It's basically a fire department exercise, but water supply counts for about 20% or something like that of the final score. So we work closely with them, and because our hydrants are well spaced, good design, good planning, they're well maintained with hydrant flushing every year. We scored essentially as good as we can on the water supply side. And that actually the ISO rating for the county, the urban part, went up one step, which they were really happy with. And of course, as Tom mentioned, we use this a lot also with master planning, and we're looking out into the future. Where do we need new pipes, and then kind of what size would they be? And that help feeds our CIP. So it's really a multi-step exercise. This is just a little example of what the model might or can do. It's animated. It's just kind of showing we have basically 3 sources. These are our pipes. So there's 2 on the west side, which is from Fairfax. It's labeled as Goose, but it's actually Trap, I think, on the east side. And so the water kind of can flow into the system. We can map who's getting what water, when, and how it might mix. So that's kind of,
Aaron, can you just go back and
sure.
run the simulation
Oops.
and just show them what?
okay.
The big blank area is the airport.
Okay,
Right,
so,
right.
yeah, so that the airport is down here. We're sitting kind of up here somewhere, right? Yeah. So the 600 zone is out here on the edges. Where you see these kind of dark spots here, those would be our elevated storage tanks at Brambleton. So treatment plant. This is the Fairfax Water's north connection to us. That's our Dulles North pump station. And this was our Route 50 connection.
So not all of our water from Fairfax comes from Corbliss?
Well, it all ties back to Corbliss, actually.
So that,
yes.
the Route 50 gets too high to come from Occoquan. That's right. That would
Yes,
make sense.
actually, yeah, it
That
would
would
be
make
very
sense.
difficult to get water from Occoquan
Yeah,
to
yeah,
us,
okay.
but there is a pipe that runs essentially down the County Parkway, and then comes across over to our Route 50 connection. So yeah, all of our water is coming from Corbliss. We just didn't show it to back to the source. But we have done various tracing at different times, starting at a tank or starting at a pump, just to kind of make sure we know where the water's running, and it can help us set some of our boundary valves or control valves to make sure we get the looping or circulation that we want.
Not that it's part of this simulation, but do we supply water to the airport?
Essentially, no, that's all Fairfax's water. We supply water to like 1 or 2 little outbuildings, but essentially no.
Have we modeled like Paonian Springs on here and some of that? Okay.
So, well, Paonian Springs, no, not yet. They don't, but our community systems also have models. So Raspberry Selma does, Rokeby, all the different community systems we have, yeah. So this overall thought about planning, design resilience also kind of seeps in or permeates everything that we do in design. And get this down to some of our most basic thoughts or most basic choices in how we pick our materials, how we lay things out. You kind of saw this, I borrowed most of this from Jessica the other day, in asset management, but part of what she was showing there is that we have a lot of assets underground. It's well over 1,000 miles of pipe, almost 50,000 valves. So it really makes a lot of sense for us to pay close attention to those materials and make sure that what we're putting in the ground is the best possible. We're not going to gold plate it, but we want to make sure that it's really effective. And I think, you know, so far we're a young system, but our break rate is low. That's in part due to our operations, but it's really in part too due to the design choices of materials. It's our utility inspections. There's a whole bunch that goes into that.
I assume that 70.6 includes ductile iron and cast iron, or
So
just straight cast iron?
that part is just cast iron, the 70 miles. We have about 1,400 miles total of pipe, so we would probably have whatever 1,300 miles of ductile, and then about 70 miles of cast. The cast iron is kind of our weakest link in a sense. It's our oldest pipe. But when that started, ductile has become kind of the industry standard, especially in this region with soils that are not too corrosive. And so that's what we use exclusively.
Is there anything better than ductile iron, or is that the best that's available right now?
I'm going to say it's the best right now. I mean, there are parts of the country with highly corrosive soils, and in that area, you may want a plastic pipe, or you may want some HDP variety or something.
There's new like coatings that have come out
Yeah.
probably in the last 20 years that they put on top of ductile to make them a little bit more resilient to corrosion. I don't know that we've started to use any of those. I know Fairfax Water was inquiring about them years ago, and they may start to use them. I'm not sure if we would get to a point that would become something that would be normal for us. You know, I think when Darren talks about, when you say, is ductile iron sort of the best? I mean, it depends on from what perspective you look at it. Corrosive, maybe in some cases, plastic could be better, but plastic doesn't hold up to a strike from an excavator bucket very well, right? So does ductile do that better? Yeah, and that's probably one of our most common, you know, sort of threats to our system is just somebody digging out there and then all of a sudden hitting a water main. So in that case, yeah, ductile's the best, you know, for that.
I guess they haven't used asbestos cement pipe for years.
Not so much.
No.
I mean, that was a very common
Yeah.
pipe material, especially on the sewer side, but water also. For our system, we have, I think, a tiny bit of it maybe, but some on the sewer
It's
side. I
wonderful
know.
working with it when
Yeah.
they'd saw cut it, and there'd be
Mhm.
this cloud of asbestos coming out of the trench.
Dust, yeah,
Very healthy.
yeah, real.
Yeah, luckily we don't have much of that.
The other
to
pipe
deal
that was
with.
kind of on the water side like that years ago was the use of the reinforced concrete pipe, right?
Mhm.
And the pipeline that we have from the city of Fairfax down the W&OD trail, that is an older sort of spiral wound concrete with steel reinforcing, and it is also probably, but nowadays they make much larger ductile pipe than they used to. Although I do think in really large water pipes, that pipe may still be common, but that is probably sort of one of the more vulnerable pipes. But ours is in, I think, relatively good shape. When we got it from the city back in 2014, when we bought the Fairfax assets, there was an inspection study given to us along with that pipe, and the portion running through Loudon was in pretty good shape.
Cost of repair is so high, you know, to compare it to picking the right material. It's
Mhm.
pretty penny wise.
Yeah, so those material choices and a lot of our design guidance is, you can find this on the web if you're curious, but we have a design manual that developers are required to follow. And built into that is an approved products list. So we only allow specific products that our product review committee has reviewed and approved. And they regularly get, you know, requests from new manufacturers or salespeople who want to provide the newest It could be a pipe, or it could be more likely some sort of pump or something else. But we spend a lot of time with that to make sure that we have kind of the most efficient, the most effective products in our system, and kind of consistency of products too, so that it's easy to maintain and repair. We don't have to have a million different spare parts. We probably have a lot of different spare parts, but we try and limit that as much as we can.
Mhm.
So when you think about design, and especially of a linear facility, one of the biggest problems, or one of the biggest issues you might see with a water main would be a break. And breaks can happen in a few different ways. One of those might be damaged during construction. These photos aren't from our system, but they kind of show the extremes of a pipe break. But we do a lot of things to kind of mitigate that, or try and prevent that before it ever happens. One of those things is related to location. We require dedicated easements for all of our pipes. A neighborhood pipe has a smaller easement. A large transmission main would get a wider easement, and that's to help keep other people out of the area near our pipe. The utility protection crew and inspections really try and enforce this and watch this. We watch it in design also, to make sure that we have space and that nobody else is in there.
For a transmission main, a big one, like what 20 feet? What are we?
20 to 30 feet,
20 to 30.
depending, yeah, on where we are.
Do we calibrate the width to the depth that we're installing it?
The depth would have an impact, yes, on what it is. The easements for that size are often negotiated, and so I don't know if there's a specific standard that we have, but generally at least 20 feet.
For our really deep stuff, this stuff, the
Mhm.
Potomac Interceptor and all that, I mean, what kind of an easement do we have on that? I mean, that was so deep. You guys were showing us pictures of that.
Yeah, and the Potomac Interceptor easement is held by DC Water, I
Yeah.
think. So, and that was, really established, 70 years ago or whatever it is, 60 years ago. It is what? I don't even recall.
I'm trying to think of Brippy, maybe we had some 50-foot easements, 60-foot. I can't,
Yeah.
it's a good question. I can't, recall. Some of those when they were installed via tunneling. Sometimes those easements are more about constructability.
Yeah.
But you're certainly not going to open cut sort of at that depth, right? So, but I think to your question though before is, I think the way we specify our easements is standard based on the diameter as a minimum. If there was an exceptional depth to it, then that may be cause for us to ask for a wider easement in case something needed to be repaired and we thought something wider would be necessary to accommodate it.
What would it constitute like an exceptional depth? Like if we're down to say 12 feet, we go, yeah, that's kind of normal. But if we're like 15, 20, we start to go, that's starting to get a little deeper than normal kind of thing. Is something around there?
Any thoughts on that one, Alton? I mean, water versus sewer are also a little different. We were just talking Brippy, which is sewer on water. Our water lines, we try not to bury them significantly deep, but we try to keep them as shallow as possible, as long as we keep them under the sort of that frost line. But
Yeah, I'm thinking sewer. I'm thinking gravity sewer.
yeah, and sometimes sewer has to get deeper because you need gravity. Yeah.
I think you were pretty well spot on, Mr. Campbell. We have maximums that we prefer in the engineering design manual for gravity sewer. I think it's 20 feet maximum depth, generally speaking, and I think that's meant to align with the sort of the cross-country wider easement that we would require in those cases of the 20 to 30 feet wide. So, yeah, generally speaking, you're spot on.
Yeah, so with that, we get the easements. We also then just look at separation. There is a, regulatory requirement to keep water and sewer separate at least 10 feet, but then there's we try and maintain separation with other utility crossings. And then the other thing too, we try and put in a durable pipe so that hopefully if it did get hit a little bit, it wouldn't break. The other types of failures that you often see are just material failures. So again, in this area, there isn't a lot of corrosion, but that is one thing we watch out for. And on our pipes, we will add corrosion control. That could be poly wrapping, the kind of bagging the pipes to keep kind of a plastic barrier there, or it could be adding a cathodic protection system.
Would you be using some of the protection systems that VDOT developed for rebar in bridges and things to protect against salt and corrosion? There's been a lot of work on those coatings. Some of them call them Teflon, but that has other implications.
I mean, I know that the ductile iron pipe industry has various coatings that are on the pipe already. And there's some others that have been proposed. I don't know specifically
Yeah.
that
It's
reference.
really made a difference on the bridges.
Hmm.
You know, they've got to redo them every 10 years, so.
Yeah. I mean, I know, for example, it's not pipes, but on our tanks, for example, our exposed metal, the coatings that they've put on the tanks now have improved tremendously over the past 15, 20 years. And the way, so I think they are much better protected than they used to be with just those types of coating systems. My guess is
So
there's
that's probably what
some
they're
of the
doing
same
on ductile
chemistry.
iron. Yeah, the chemistry, yeah.
One of the systems we would use on some of our larger diameter transmission mains would be we actually bond all the individual pipes together because they have gasketed joints that makes them sort of disconnected electrically from each other. So we would actually have cables that are welded to jump over that joint and create everything, connect everything together sort of electronically. That's not the right word, electrically.
Yeah.
And then bury anodes in the ground that are connected to that so that the anodes basically absorb a lot of that current and then they decay in the ground. And I guess we've never done it, but I guess eventually you dig up those anodes and you replace them as they become insufficient as time goes on.
Right,
And,
so you have
and
to dig 'em
and
up
you
when
also
they-
can wrap those joints with materials to keep them protected
Mhm.
from if there's corrosive soils in the area. So those would be, that's an example of some of the ones I know we've used in the past. We then have monitoring stations in the ground so that you can go out periodically and regularly measure what sort of the resistivity in all that system is, and then trend it and then figure out when it's time to replace some of the components of that corrosion control system. I'm not sure if that's what you're speaking of, if it's anything similar to what VDOT
Yeah,
has done where they create something sacrificial more or less to absorb that.
there's a lot
Yeah,
of.
the
that
corrosive
going on.
current.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to is the work that's going on. And, you know, it relates from one to the other.
Yeah, yeah. The coatings I'm familiar with that have come out of the ductile iron pipe industry are more on the galvanic side, basically using galvanizing of sorts for the piping, but there's probably different types of epoxy coatings that have been used as well, I'm guessing.
So I'll touch on one last part that's kind of built into our design. And when you start thinking about facilities, there's a few other things that we do just as a part of our everyday design. So at our facilities, the most common issues you might have would be a power outage or perhaps just equipment failure. We have a lot of mechanical electronics that over time can fail. But we try our best to prevent that and make it as reliable and redundant as possible by, one, choosing the right equipment. We're also sizing all of our pump stations and many of our facilities on kind of that firm capacity +1 or N+1 so that we can meet our peak demands with, say, 3 pumps, but we actually have a 4th. So that if that pump needs to be repaired, needs to be maintained, something, we have that spare right there ready to go. And then all of our facilities too also have generators or portable generator backups that we can use. And that power question, whatever, I mean, when you start thinking about climate change and extreme heat, that's one of the things we also have to be careful about is, do those power, do all the electronics, are they going to survive if it gets a lot hotter? And I'll just kind of close with saying, you know, I touched a little bit on planning and design, but I mean, really this thought about resiliency or reliability. I mean, I think it's all across Loudon Water. And it's just integral to what we do. And I'd gladly take any more questions or.
Well, I like this slide, and I really appreciate the presentation from both of you. Down in the lower left-hand corner is SCADA, the control system, and keeping that reliable, safe is a real important piece. And we've had some presentations on that part of it too. I'm really impressed with the amount of resiliency that you're building in, thinking about all the time. Really want to continue to encourage that type of work.
Yeah, I agree. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
At some point, I think we have to, maybe we could have a little bit more of a presentation on just the modeling system that you all have. It's so cool. You guys have showed us some of it,
Yeah.
but maybe a little bit, not, there's so much there, so, but just a little bit more into it. It's so cool.
Well, we've talked about that, and I would say, you know, there's kind of, you've heard a couple different ones. There's our system hydraulic modeling, and then there's this OASIS, which we're still a little bit in the early stages. So we were talking about whether it's the right time, but we have that on the list, definitely.
It's
Yep.
just amazing to have so much of it, of all of the system in a model like that. It's so useful in this particular business where you can't afford to be in a situation in the future that you didn't anticipate. The ramifications are so great. And so all of this effort, which is so substantial, but it's so worth it. And of course, the irony is that if nobody knows about it, and that's a good thing. It's almost like the reservoirs. It's like, yeah, we never had to release from. That's a good thing, you know, but and so in some respects, I feel like there can be a lack of appreciation for all of this work, but it's the fact that nobody knows that's actually proof it's working. You know, and you know, when I was in Hamilton, we had a well 14 was our well, and we ended up getting a litigation with Jim Burton and all of the county and all that stuff. But we didn't have enough water in the town for like 2 years, and so you know, and I grew up in Reston. And I'm like, what? I don't know. This is the first world. We turn on the faucet, the water comes out. What's the deal? And Hamilton's like, sorry, you can't wash your car. You can't water the lawn. What is this? You know, this is draconian. And so at least for me at that time, that was 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was. But it gave me such an appreciation for what a lack of planning feels like. And so I just think this is so tremendous, and I'm grateful everybody put so much effort into it.
For me, coming from the dark ages,
Yeah, I think, and I.
the model that we had didn't have just had major regions in it because of
When is
computer,
the earliest possible time?
because of computer capacity.
No.
And the first computer that ran the Corvallis plant, the first one, 14 kilobytes. And I'm not exaggerating.
No, you're
That
not.
was the first computer that they had there, so shows you how old I am.
Well, Mr. Campbell, if you want to hear more about modeling, Darren will not only be glad to show you, he will get you certified and continuing education credits if you would like to do it as well.
Well, that's
So-
not all bad.
I think what Brent indicated is a good idea. Love to see that.
Did we have somebody online? that wanted to ask a question? Okay, all right. All right. Do we have any other questions for our distinguished panel? All right,
Thank you all very much.
thank you very much. We
Yeah,
appreciate
thank
that. This concludes our year of 4 meetings.
Yep.
And so let's think about what we want to do for next year. If we all are graced with coming back to this committee. Well, that's right. We don't do that till June. So at least have 2 more next year. So let's give that some thought. And if you have some suggestions of some of the other water resource topics that we can explore. This has been a really good year, a lot of education, a lot of knowledge transfer. So we appreciate that.
Very good.
All right. Anything else? All right, then I think I need a motion to adjourn.
I so moved.
Second,
All in favor?
right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for attending online.